Hi there, Steve Kaufman here. Today I want to talk a bit about the conference that I attended in Portland and touch on some very important concepts, I think, in language learning. And this revolves around comprehensible input, compelling input, repetition, noticing. So let's start with the conference. The conference was part of call it a movement or a group of people involved with language teachers who promote the idea of story listening. And I'm going to put a link here in the description box where you can find out more about it. Story listening as a technique, as a way of teaching language. And story listening is part of this comprehensible input, CI. I may have referred to it in a previous video as compelling input, which of course is the ideal, but comprehensible input as being the main way, accessing comprehensible input, meaningful messages that we can understand is the main way in which our brains acquire the language. So how does this translate into an activity in the classroom? And then which is what the conference was mostly about. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my perspective as a learner who's not in a classroom. So the story listening presentations were about how a teacher with a whiteboard can tell a story in a very animated way, whereby through the sort of animation and the drawings on the whiteboard and just the very sympathetic and enthusiastic nature of the teacher, meaning is imparted so that learners who are not very familiar with the language actually start to follow the story. And Beniko Mason, who was the main presenter, she has evidence that her students, even only once a week, participating in this kind of a class, end up acquiring more words and improving their TOEIC score more than is the case in traditional classrooms. Now, she did also say that these stories, animated, lively, fun stories, tend to get the students reading more. And there was general agreement that ultimately we have to read a lot in order to improve our vocabulary, in order to get better in the language, do better on TOEIC tests, and so forth. Stephen Krashen was there in his inimitable way. He played the piano, he was charming, he was funny, and he explained some of the key aspects of his comprehensible input hypothesis. He made it very clear that an hypothesis in science is a possible explanation of a phenomenon. And if it's possible to demonstrate that it doesn't explain whatever phenomenon it is, like language acquisition, then of course the hypothesis is disproven. But so far, there has been no evidence that comprehensible input doesn't lead to language acquisition. There are competing theories, and I'll get to that. So Stephen Krashen presented about comprehensible input, and then he also made a second presentation where he sort of said that the stages in comprehensible input are, first of all, stories, which is what we were being shown, these engaging ways to tell stories in class. Then the second stage is, in his mind, fiction, even very lowbrow fiction. And then the third stage is when the learner can then go out and read whatever they want. All right. So after the presentations, after the conference, I was at dinner with these teachers. By the way, all of the teachers were extremely enthusiastic and positive. And I think that's a tremendous quality for a teacher to have, enthusiasm. Their skills in the languages they were teaching were, varied from very good to less than very good, but certainly competent, which to me is not an issue because there's so much native content available that the teacher doesn't have to be the only source of the language. So, but at the dinner, it was made, the teachers explained to me that within comprehensible input, there's this story listening is a theme, or basically one stream. whereby the teacher does most of the talking, tries to elicit some response from the students, but basically it's the teacher telling the story. The second stream is TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling, whereby the teacher and the learner sort of develop the story together. So there's more participation from the class. And the third stream is, and in this TPRS, however, the class will focus on specific grammatical structures or specific vocabulary themes or something during the classroom. And the third type of CI activity in the classroom, from what I could gather, is a form of TPRS where the classroom is engaged with the teacher in building a story together, but it is not limited to any specific vocabulary area or grammatical patterns or anything. It's just a free use of the language in building a story together with the classroom. Now, it's obvious that this comprehensible input in whatever form has a number of significant advantages. It appears that people learn better, that the students acquire more vocabulary, end up speaking better, and have better comprehension than the conventional grammar-based form of instruction. The second big advantage is that there is a lot less testing and a lot less, therefore, work for the teacher in correcting tests after the class, so that it's beneficial for the teacher and it's beneficial for the student. Win-win. Now, my perspective, of course, is not that of a teacher in a classroom. I've never been a teacher in a classroom. I am a learner, and I observe other learners at Link, for example. So I have some things where I have a slight disagreement. For example, when I sat down with the teachers for dinner, and I said that when I'm learning languages at Link, I like to have 10 to 15% unknown words in the content that I'm listening to. And it's, no, you can't. You have to have like 98% known words. And that may be true if you are free reading. It may even be true in a classroom. But as an independent language learner, given that I start out with 100% new words, unknown words, if I tried to limit myself to 90% known words, I would take forever to get anywhere. And if you are in an environment such as Link, where you have access to online dictionaries, where you have the audio, you can click on words and see the meaning right away. You can click on words or phrases, see the meaning, hear them pronounced, granted text-to-speech. Then you can listen to natural audio again. You can take it away and listen several times, go back and read again. In this environment, you can actually tackle more difficult material and progress more quickly if you take on a higher percentage of unknown words. Now, you have to be motivated. You have to be willing to deal with the uncertainty of having maybe 20% of the words there that you don't understand the first time through. You have to be willing to go back to it again. All of those things are true, and maybe that doesn't work in a classroom. But so there's the first thing. I think we should challenge students, in my opinion, maybe even in the classroom, to take on content that's a little more difficult than just 2% unknown words. The second thing is, start with stories. Sure, a lot of these stories that they use are sort of fantasy, fairy tale, folk tale, imagination. As an adult, I don't find these stories very compelling or very interesting. I prefer, for example, the stories that we have at Link, which are daily. John works in a restaurant, he's a cook, he drives to work, he drives home. Simple stories that are relatively meaningless, but embody the most common verbs in the language. They do have some meaning, and the stories repeat the vocabulary over and over again. So to the extent that I'm motivated to learn the language, these stories, in fact, are in a way compelling. One other thing is, I mentioned in a tweet that I think noticing is a big issue in language learning. Because when we begin learning, it's just noise. We don't notice anything. We don't notice where one word ends, the next word begins. We don't notice the functions of the words, nothing. And in time, as we start to save words and start to understand which words are verbs and which words are nouns and what they mean, then we start to notice other things. We start to notice connections between words. We start to notice the pronunciation. And so my question is, as an independent learner, how can I improve my ability to notice? Because when I notice more, I learn more. Now, the minute I said that in a tweet, I get involved in the sort of disputes that go on in the sort of language acquisition field, where someone has done noticing hypothesis and there's an output hypothesis and everyone disagrees with each other. And it's as if the person who did this noticing hypothesis and tied this to some kind of deliberate study of grammar, that has forever defined the meaning of notice. Okay, my meaning of notice is different. I was doing the dishes earlier here, cleaning up after breakfast, and I'm listening to our mini stories in Arabic for the, 30th, 40th time. And every time I listen, I notice something that I hadn't noticed before. I'm aware of myself noticing. I'm not deliberately noticing, but I'm aware that I notice an ending, or in the case of Arabic verbs, the beginning of the verb, or I notice a certain word that I hadn't noticed before, or a certain phrase. I shouldn't say that I hadn't noticed before. I might have noticed and then forgotten and noticed again. And the same when I review the lessons on my iPad. I've gone through the lesson. I've saved all the, I've changed all the blue words that I needed to yellow. All the unknown words have been saved. So I review it now. Before I start reviewing the lesson, the story, I go through might be 20 yellow links that are in that lesson. I review them in my flashcards. And then I listen to the story while reading it. And I find that having gone through the flashcards before the story, and this is a lesson that I've already gone through before, and then when I listen through it again, I notice things in the story better. So at the very least, I believe that massive input helps you notice, repetitive listening and reading helps you notice, some review of flashcards, different activities, followed by a review of the lesson helps you notice. Having read the story, and then when you go away and listen to it, it helps you notice. So these are some of the things that help you notice. So I'd be interested in people's response to this. To what extent are you conscious of noticing things at certain times, maybe forgetting them again and noticing them again? And is noticing a part of your language learning process? And what things do you think help you notice? All right. So there you have it, a brief summary of my discussion in Portland. I can get into more detail if you want. And I wanted to sort of bring up this discussion of comprehensible input-based learning, which I agree with, and what can be done in the classroom, what does the learner do on his or her own, and what is the role of repetition, or what are the things that contribute to improving our ability to notice. Okay, thank you for listening. I look forward to your comments. Bye for now.